Think we're live. I don't know. This is the best way to start a stream. Just being totally frozen and not knowing what to do. Coming up, we got the retro camera roundup, new lenses from Viltrox, Canon, and Nikon. Elgato makes teleprompters relevant, and Intel launches new old processors. But first, our friends from Pearl Jam. I'm just kidding. We don't have any musical intro for this podcast slash live stream. Um, anyway, I finally figured out my stream issues. I think. Let me know if this is actually working. Are you hearing me? Are you seeing me? Hopefully, there's no crazy dropouts. I think it was my ISP, and I think it was Wi-Fi, or both of those things. I don't know. I switched ISPs, and I finally got a wired connection to my computer. So hopefully, we'll have a solid stream, solid connection. So I'm streaming, I think at 1440p. I still can't figure out how to stream in 4K. I always get this weird error message from YouTube saying that this resolution is not supported, something, but whatever. 1440p should be good. And yeah, thanks to Riverside for saving my butt on the first two live streams. I was able to stream with Riverside's web-based platform, even though I couldn't stream straight from OBS into YouTube. I was able to stream through Riverside. So that really worked out. And anyway, so yeah, let me know if you're watching, drop a message in the chat so I know I am not streaming into the void. Hello, void. You're looking awfully bleak today. What's that? We're all just fallen leaves blowing in the wind. Our lives are flickering candle flames snuffed out by a chill draft. Oh, I've got gas. Anyway, so it's a pretty light news week. There wasn't a whole lot of that really caught my eye and my interest, but there's some cameras that I skipped in the last couple weeks that I thought maybe I would just touch on quickly in this episode. So it's going to be the new gear roundup, but retro camera roundup. So we have the Nikon ZIF. I think it's called the ZIF. No, it's the Nikon ZF. We've got the Sony A7C Mark II, and we've got the Sony Alpha A7C R, or A7 Kerr. These, I guess I didn't really touch on these previously because these are in a lot of ways just sort of repackaged cameras using kind of existing technology, but putting them into either retro bodies or, I guess in Sony's case, maybe not necessarily retro, but more just, I don't know, smaller, more streamlined bodies. The Sony cameras like the A7C Mark II and the A7CR are very similar, I think, in their form factor and design to the A6700 or just the A6000 lineup in general. They've got the sort of rangefinder EVF instead of the EVF on the top, and just fewer buttons and fewer dials, and they've got the card slot off to the left side instead of the right side, single card slot instead of dual card slot. So anyway, we're talking about the Sony A7C2 and the A7CR, so let's go ahead and lead off with those. The A7C Mark II is the A7 IV in this smaller, more compact body. You're getting the same processor, the same sensor as the A7 IV, same megapixels, obviously, same video capabilities, without the dual card slots. And so I guess it's just one SD UHS-2 card slot. And then, yeah, you still get the mechanical shutter, I believe. But so you lose a couple things, but nothing major. But you gain the AI processor. So this one has the AI processor that was launched in the A7 V, that was in the ZV-E1, and is in the A6700. Now it's in the A7C Mark II. It's not in the A7 IV. I got a question from Rambler. He's asking it's the same with better processor because of that AI feature. So technically, I think there's with the AI processor, it's actually a separate processor. So you've got the main Bion's XR processor that's in all the latest cameras, and then you've got another AI processor. So two processors. So essentially, like the Bion's XR processor is like what is typically doing all of the imaging processing, whether that's photo, video, and the AI processor is doing all of the algorithms that are helping with more autofocus, more advanced autofocusing features. And in some of the cameras, it has that auto reframe function, like the A7 or the A6700 and the ZVE1. So two different things, I think. And then the A7CR is the baby A7 V. So this has got that 61 megapixel sensor, again, the Bion's XR processor, and it has that dedicated AI processor, but that was already in the A7 V. So unlike the A7C2, you're not really getting anything new with this one. You're just kind of getting the smaller body, only one SD card slot, and I guess fewer buttons and dials. And real quick, the Nikon ZF. This is essentially, from what I understand, it's the same sensor as the Nikon Z6 and the Z6 Mark II, but the processing coming out of the Nikon Z8 and the Z9. So it should have updated autofocusing features and subject recognition and 3D tracking, it's saying here in the key features. But you got that same 24.5 megapixel sensor, and it's still limited, just like all those cameras that have that same sensor that I always talk about. It's still limited in its recording capabilities, just like that generation of cameras has always been. So you basically get 4K 30 in full frame, and then 4K 60 is going to be that 1.5 times crop. And a lot of people are just sort of asking, I think on YouTube anyway, like, what is the point of these cameras? Who are they for? And, you know, because again, they're just basically repackaged versions of cameras that already exist. And I think maybe it's kind of worth like considering or just kind of understanding that there's kind of a wider audience or a wider market for cameras than just the YouTube camera channel, you know, community, essentially. You know, maybe the Facebook groups like camera groups and all the kind of social media stuff that exists around camera brands and camera aficionados. But there's like a bunch of people that don't follow this stuff online. And especially like in Asia and like other big cities around the world that still have like camera markets and camera stores, a lot of people might just walk into a camera store wanting to buy a camera and not knowing that maybe the Nikon ZF is just the Nikon Z6, but liking the way it looks, liking the body style. Or maybe looking at the Sony A7C Mark II, and again, liking the small size, maybe the two-tone is appealing. And yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of people out there that don't really care that these are repackaged cameras or cameras that already exist in another form or function and maybe have more features than the previous bodies. But these cameras are going to be, you know, positioned at people who don't want like all the advanced features and maybe the bigger body, et cetera, et cetera. So it doesn't really matter. I think having more bodies out there isn't really a big deal. You know, you kind of know, are these cameras for you or are they not for you? And I guess that's why I hadn't really talked about them previously, just because they're really not for me. I would much rather have the more full-featured bodies than the more stripped-down ones, but I can obviously see that it would be of use to certain kinds of people. All right, so moving on from the retro camera roundup, there are some interesting new lenses that have been announced recently. And starting off with, let me go back to, here we go. Coming back to, or starting off with the Viltrox 16mm f1.8 for Sony E-mount. This one's cool because there aren't a lot of 16mm prime lenses out there for full frame that I'm aware of. It's kind of one of those ultra wide angle fields of view or focal lengths that typically exist on a zoom lens, so usually a 16 to 35 or a 16 to 28, but not often, at least as far as I'm aware, as a prime lens, and especially a really fast f1.8. I'm surprised that this one isn't also on the L mount. I would imagine that it's going to come out sooner or later on the L mount, because I think Viltrox is pretty much doing, Sony E and L mount, but I could be wrong. But I think right now it's only on the E mount, and you can see here that it's $549. So reasonably well priced, I think. So this is a fully autofocusing lens with an f1.8 ultra wide focal length, obviously. It's got some cool features on it. You've got an aperture ring that's clickable and declickable. It has this LCD screen on here, which I've seen displays a lot of cool information. So if you switch this into manual focus, you'll get like a distance markings on here. Tells you like how far you're focusing. I think there's like a little readout that'll show you like the actual distance. Seems like Nikon, we're going to look at a Nikon lens here. Nikon may be getting rid of their digital displays, but Viltrox is adding them into their newest lenses. And there are two function buttons on this lens. You can see that here, function 1 and function 2. You've got an AF/MS switch. So really a full-featured lens. And then down here on the lens mount, there's actually a USB-C port to update the firmware. I don't know if they have software in particular. Like I know that Tamron has similar functionality. They've got a USB-C port on their newest version 2 lenses. And not only can you upgrade the firmware on their lenses, but they also have software that can change the way the lens functions. So that's pretty cool. And I don't know if that's something that Viltrox does as well. But yeah, this is a really interesting, or this is a good release, I think, because it's not something that exists, especially like in a mirrorless mount. Maybe there's older SLR versions of a 16 millimeter prime, but again, I don't really know of any. Typically, you see 14 millimeters as a prime focal length, and then sometimes an 18, and then 20 and beyond, but typically not a 16. If you do any sort of architecture, real estate, photo, or video, then a 16 is really kind of the standard. It's really all you need, especially for real estate. If you do need to crop in or you want to punch in a little bit, having a 16 to 35 is helpful, but you don't need a ton of resolution for real estate listings. So I could just see getting this prime and then just cropping your photos in post if you need to. Yeah, so this is cool because usually a 16 to 35 f2.8, like the Sony G Master Mark II, is a $2,300 lens. And then the 16 to 28 Sigma, which I used to have that lens. I sold it. But it was a really great lens, and that is around $800 or $900. But those are both f2.8, so you get more than a full stop of light on this prime. And I just feel like I love a 16 to 35, but sometimes if you have the 24 to 70, you have a lot of overlap with 24 to 35 already. So I can see this maybe sort of replacing that 16 to 35 or that 16 to 28 with just this one lens. So I'd be really curious to check this one out. I've reached out to Viltrox a lot of times and they just ghost me. So maybe one day I can get some stuff from Viltrox. But yeah, this one's a pretty interesting one to me. Rambler wants to know, for someone looking to purchase their second, is that a must or like to have lens? It really depends on what you do. I love wide angle. So for me, I wouldn't say it's a must have, but again, it just depends on what you do. For people who vlog, a 16 millimeter is a great field of view because you can get your face and your body in the frame without it being too close. So it can be more of a medium, like a medium close-up shot as opposed to just your head. And you don't have to hold the camera way out. So it can be kind of more comfortable. So for people who do that kind of vlogging, I know it's not everybody, but 16 is a good field of view for that. And plus, if you have like active stabilization in your camera that's going to crop in, having that extra field of view on a 16 millimeter still gives you enough room to have that active stab enabled. Yeah, I mean, to me, this could be, it's a pretty versatile lens. Astrophotography, 60 millimeter f1.8, that's a, pretty great combo right there. I don't know how sharp this lens is wide open. I've only watched one video about it from Mark Bennett's Camera Crisis, and yeah, he said it was pretty sharp. Um, but yeah, could be a good purchase for you for sure. All right, let's move on to the Nikon Nikkor Z600 millimeter f6.3 VRS lens. And this one, I don't want to spend too much time on, but it kind of caught my eye because it's a 600 millimeter, but it's only an f6.3, and it's $4,800. And I think I forgot to pull it up, but there is I don't have that up here, do I? No. Nikon 180 to 600 millimeter. 180 to 600 millimeter f5.6 to 6.3 VR lens for only $1,700. So this covers the exact same focal length at the exact same aperture, so 600 millimeters at f6.3, and it is way cheaper. And so I just wondered, what is the point of this lens? Obviously, it's going to be smaller and lighter than the 180 to 600, probably considerably smaller and lighter. And I would imagine it's going to have better optics. The prime is going to be sharper, probably less distortion, probably less chromatic aberration. But I did watch Frono's Photos video about this lens, and he had a side-by-side comparison between this and the 180 to 600, and that lens looked pretty good, pretty damn good in terms of sharpness and just overall image quality. So I wonder about the purpose of this lens. I mean, it's very specific to a certain person who just wants this, who doesn't want the versatility of the zoom lens, and obviously wants the weight savings. I tested out I was very interested in, I've been interested in the Sony 200 to 600 for a while, and I've gone and tried it out in the store a few times. It is a really heavy lens, super heavy, so much so that I really question how viable it is as a kind of walk around non-tripod lens. And I would imagine that the 180 to 600 is going to be similar. So this lens is probably much more doable as a hand-holdable lens. But again, it's more than $3,000 more expensive than the zoom lens. They also have, Nikon has a 600 millimeter f4. I think it's an f4, but that one's like $15,000. So interesting that Nikon, they're really pushing out a bunch of interesting zooms, primes, and excuse me, they're pushing out a lot of interesting telephotos, both primes and zoom lenses. Rambler, you got me at astrophotography. Then there you go, man. 16 millimeter f1.8. That's your go-to right there. And then 600 millimeter, is that like a telescope? Can you take a pic of a planet? You could probably take a pic of Mars, but it wouldn't be it wouldn't be like, I mean, you could definitely take a pic of the moon. Yeah, I don't know how, it's not like a telescope, but it's pretty far. Um, yeah, maybe Venus. I don't know. Probably not. They also have teleconverters. They've got a 1.4 and a 2 times teleconverter. So if you put a 2 times teleconverter on this, you're looking at a 1200 millimeters. So maybe then you could see Jupiter. All right, and then I think the last lens I wanted to touch on is this crazy ass one from Canon, the RF 10 to 20 millimeter f4. And when I saw this lens, I thought this was an APS-C because I have the Sony 10 to 20 millimeter f4, but this is an APS-C lens. But in fact, the Canon is a full frame. So this covers RF ultra wide lens for full frame cameras. 10 millimeters on a full frame is insanely wide. So let's check it out real quick. Turn this camera on. Let's try that again. There we go. All right, so you're looking at 10 millimeters on full frame. but this obviously does not cover the whole sensor because this is an APS-C lens, but that is the same field of view that you'd get on the Canon lens minus the vignette. You're seeing that vignette, right? Make sure I'm zoomed all the way out. Yeah. So this is insanely wide. Look at my arms. I look like freaking Gumby. So this is the field of view that you'll get with this lens on a Canon full frame camera minus the vignette. Look how much, like, it makes my desk look like the ocean. It is insanely wide. I don't know the purpose of this, but it is pretty cool. It is pretty damn cool. It's a rectilinear lens, so it's no fisheye, no crazy barrel distortion. But yeah, I don't really know the use case for it other than just extremely stylized something, you know, skateboard video, some kind of crazy action. This is like a GoPro on steroids. Really interesting lens, but obviously not something that's going to be used all the time. But I'm glad it exists. It's also very expensive at $2,300. This could be a great architecture real estate lens, but I think 10 millimeters is too wide, right? You'd probably want to be zoomed into at least 14 millimeters to get something that looks normal, because you can see the perspective on this is just crazy. Like, my TV is not that far away, but this lens makes it look like it's maybe 3 times farther away and 3 times smaller than it actually is. Yeah, it's a pretty wild field of view. But what's interesting, I think, is just having something new and different. And I think also one of the promises of the mirrorless format was smaller, lighter, more compact, but also more possibilities, like more just things that weren't available or things that weren't possible physically before. So just like maybe we weren't seeing 16 millimeter prime lenses before, now we've got one for Sony from Viltrox, and we certainly weren't seeing very many of these types of lenses. Maybe they did exist, I'm not really sure, but yeah, pretty cool. Pretty cool lens, maybe a rental, not necessarily one that you're going to go out and buy and use all the time, but definitely pretty interesting. Rambler saying all these crazy prices from Canon and Nikon make the Sony lenses a great bargain. Well, Sony has very comparable lenses to those. Those are actually the Nikon 180. Let's see, the one we just looked at, Nikon 180 to 600 is $1,696, so $1,700 for this lens, and then the Sony 200 to 600 is actually $2,000, $1,998. So Sony's actually more expensive for the same lens essentially, but the Nikon is actually a little bit wider at 180 versus 200, and it's about what, $300 less money. So they kind of trade blows. Canon typically, I think, is the most expensive by usually $100 or something, and then Sony and Nikon, I don't know. It just depends on the lens, to be honest. Looks fish lens. Yeah, so it's not even this lens. The one I showed you, the APS-C 10 to 20, doesn't have a lot of distortion. I think a lot of it's being corrected in the camera, but it's not a fisheye lens. But you're seeing the actual lens because it's not meant to cover a full frame sensor. So you're just seeing the edges of the lens. But yeah, it's super, super wide. Okay, I think that's all the lenses. And the next thing I wanted to just touch on briefly is the Elgato prompter, or the Elgato prompter. I can never figure out if I want to pronounce it Elgato or Elgato. This was not on my radar at all, and I saw one video about it today from Harris Heller. I can't remember the name of his channel. He used to go by his name Harris Heller, but now he's something else. But he talks about, teleprompters are not. I know a lot of people on YouTube use teleprompters, but they're not as widely adopted as you might think for like the really great functionality. I've had a teleprompter for a long time. My wife bought me one when I first started dabbling in YouTube, and I probably used it less than a handful of times for all the reasons that Harris talks about in his video, them not being super useful because you're basically you're tying up a camera that's got to be mounted on this specific device. It's got to be sort of bolted in typically and then covered with this black fabric. Then you have to dedicate a phone or a tablet to serve as the teleprompter. Um, and it I think for a certain level of content creator who has made it to the point where they have a dedicated tripod, a dedicated camera, a dedicated lens, and a dedicated tablet or phone to serve as their teleprompter setup, then it makes a lot of sense. But for a lot of other people who don't have extra equipment, then the prospect of setting up and tearing down a teleprompter every time you want to make a video was just more trouble than it was worth. So I tried it a few times, and I think one video that I actually did read from a teleprompter script was very stilted and very mechanical. So that was another reason not to use a teleprompter. It definitely takes a lot of practice to be good at it anyway. But so what is new about this one, the Elgato Prompter, is that instead of using a phone or a tablet, it actually has a built-in monitor. And the monitor will just plug into your computer and be recognized as any monitor. So just another screen that you hook up to your computer, and then you can display whatever you want on this monitor. It could be your camera feed, it could be your script, it could be your Zoom call, like whatever sort of software, if you're doing like a teleconference meeting, or if you are doing a remote podcast with multiple guests. Anything that you want can be displayed on the screen, and then obviously it's going to be reflected back for you to see. And that's really the big bonus or the big innovation with this product. And another thing, if you're setting up a live stream, so I have my camera here, but I have my screen over here, and the camera is being fed into the screen. So when I'm setting up my shot, setting up my lighting and everything, I'm looking at the camera, but then in order to actually see, I have to look over here to the screen. So like my lighting looks good, but I'm not really seeing it because I'm looking a different way. So that's why it's nice to have an on-camera monitor, but this can essentially serve as your on-camera monitor. And then you can just easily switch it over to your script whenever you need to, or switch it over to your guests whenever you need to. So it's actually pretty cool. And it's, I think, $280. So it's not bad, and you can mount it a couple different ways. You can actually hang it off of your lens, which is not my favorite deal, but it does also come with a bracket. You can see the face cam is mounted onto this bracket here. Oh, I'm not even doing picture-in-picture like an idiot. And you can also mount your camera, like a mirrorless camera, onto this bracket as well. And another problem with teleprompters typically is that you can't use a really wide lens on them because the lens is going to start seeing the edges of the teleprompter. But Harris in his video, using the bracket, was able to move the camera close enough to the mirror to, I think, use like a 17 or 18 millimeter wide field of view, which is really wide, plenty wide, more than wide enough probably for just about any use case in which you'd want to be using a teleprompter. So this might actually be a legit option for people who have always wanted to get a teleprompter but never really found it to be super practical. Is it just better to read a sheet of paper on a desk than prompter? It just depends on your style and depends on what you find easy. The reason for the teleprompter is to make it seem like you are not reading a script. It's to make it seem like you're just talking off the top of your head directly to your audience. And if you're really practiced at it and really good at it, and you're good at writing scripts that seem natural, there's really no beating it in terms of just like being able to just get through a video quickly without messing up, without doing multiple takes, and seeming natural and present because you're just making eye contact the entire time. So it really just depends. I mean, some people like to use teleprompters, some people don't. And some people might prefer a script. Maybe it's more casual for them, but it also is probably going to mean that you're doing multiple takes. You could probably read a few lines, deliver to camera, read a few lines, deliver to camera. All right, last thing I wanted to touch on is the launch of the new Intel CPUs. These are the 14,000 series of CPUs. So they've got all the way from the i5 14600 to the 14700 and the i9 14900. And I don't know if anybody who watches or listens to me is super interested in computers like I am. I am almost as much as I'm interested in cameras, also interested in computers, because they are what allow us to actually take the images out of our computers or from our computers and turn them into something, content, stories, movies, videos, whatever you want to call it. So the computer is, to me, I don't know, it's two sides of the same coin, essentially. So I'm super interested in computers. I like to build my own computers. I like Windows and Mac computers. I'm just really into it. So it's always new. It's always not necessarily an event, but always something that catches my interest when new CPUs, new graphics cards, new technology is introduced. But don't get it twisted. These new processors from Intel are not exactly new. These are very, very, very mild refreshes of the 1300 series of CPUs. So for instance, this 14900K gets like a very mild clock bump. It goes maybe 200 megahertz faster boost clocks than the 13900K. No physical differences, no additional cores, no additional threads, nothing, no additional cache. It's essentially the same processor with a very fractional upgrade to speed. As far as I'm aware, the only one of these processors that got anything new on it, anything physically different, is the 14700K, which got 4 additional efficiency cores. So it went from like a 24 core to a 28 core CPU. That's the only one that got anything physically different. And yeah, I just say all that. So if you already have a 1300 series processor, there's absolutely zero reason to upgrade. Even if you've got the 1200 series, there's really zero reason to upgrade, because these are on the same motherboards. There's really no additional features that come with these at all. If you're in the market for something new altogether, then yeah, take a look at these. They are the latest ones, but also it would totally make sense to look at the current gen, the 1300 series. If they get a price drop, then it would make sense, in my opinion, just to get the 1300s as opposed to the 1400s, because the differences are so minor that it's totally not worth like paying more for these, and certainly not upgrading. But one thing I wanted to, if you are like new to the world of Windows computers, maybe you're thinking about buying one or building one, and especially if you are into content creation, video editing, like After Effects and Fusion, that kind of stuff, and you don't know anything about this stuff, I just wanted to put it out real quick. Make sure that you get the K version and not the KF version. So the difference between these is the K has the iGPU, so it's got the GPU built onto the processor, and the KF does not have that. And you would think it doesn't really matter because you're going to use a discrete graphics card anyway. But what Intel has done on the back end with Adobe and Blackmagic with DaVinci Resolve is build in some functionality with the iGPU in that software. So there's actually H.264 and H.265 encoders and decoders that are built into those iGPUs that are supposedly better than the ones that are on the NVIDIA and AMD graphics cards. And you can enable the iGPU to work alongside your dedicated graphics card in Resolve and in Premiere Pro to get additional performance. So I just wanted to put that out there for anybody who is interested. As you can see also that the KF version is a little bit cheaper because it doesn't have the iGPU built into it. But if you are doing content creation with Premiere and Resolve in particular, then just spend the extra, $24 and get the K version. Okay. I think that is everything in the new Gear Roundup. Let's take a look at what to watch. All right. Not a whole lot of new and interesting stuff that I remember watching this past week, but a couple things that I wanted to highlight. The first of which is this video from Mike B. Salazar on the A6700 versus the FX30. This is clearly better. And I just wanted to shout out this video because it's a great video. If you are interested in these two cameras and you are trying to decide which one might be better for you, he covers this in a lot of really great detail and a lot of great nuance. And he clearly knows these cameras very well. And I'm working on one of these videos myself, comparing these two cameras. And he touches on a lot of stuff that I hadn't even really considered. Like, for instance, the clear image zoom function on the A6700. Oops, sorry. The clear image zoom function on the A6700, because of the AI processor, allows you to use tracking autofocus in clear image zoom, whereas on the FX30, because it doesn't have the AI processor, you lose tracking autofocus when you go into clear image zoom. And that's not something that I really paid much attention to because I don't use clear image zoom a lot, but some people might. And that's just the kind of detail that he goes into and the nuances that he's able to pick out between these two cameras. And I just thought it's definitely picked up since I watched this yesterday. It only had a couple hundred views, but now it's up over 1,000. And it's a great video. And I know using YouTube analytics that apparently people are interested in this topic. So I thought it was curious that his video hadn't quite taken off yet, but it seems to be doing better. So I definitely recommend that you check this out if you are interested and give Mr. Salazar some love on this video. He did a great job on it. And moving over to another A6700 review. This one is from Victor Lafortesa, and this guy doesn't necessarily need me to shout him out, but this is just a great looking video. Great footage, shot a lot of, I mean, he lives like, I think he kind of bounces around between like Japan, Canada, other like big East Asian cities and countries. So he's got lots of really cool footage, especially a lot of nighttime shots, cityscapes. So it's just a really great looking video. There's nothing, he mentions that it's not necessarily like a technical review. So it's mostly his feelings and impressions and his use case, why he thinks this camera is working for him, but just good vibes and really well produced and really nice looking video. And lastly, one I just saw this morning is a new one from Waqas Qazi. If you don't know him, he's a colorist. He makes amazing videos about Resolve color. Every time I watch one of his videos, I learn something new, if not many new things. So definitely check him out if you are at all interested in color, especially if you're working in Resolve. Another video comparing the iPhone 15 to a much higher end camera, in this case, the Alexa 35. So just kind of a fun video, but it's really interesting or really surprising how well the iPhone holds up to the Alexa. And he got a friend of his who I guess probably owns or rents the Alexa 35 to shoot this test footage. Can't find the BTS real quick. Yeah, here we go. So here, this operator you can see is using the Alexa, and it's not like a crazy setup. They're obviously using the sunlight and then a big diffusion cloth here. So anyway, I forget, let's see. So there's definitely some shots where the iPhone holds up really well. And what's cool about this is that he goes into great detail, kind of comparing the exposures and using things like false colors to really see where they're different. Because if you just eyeball it, the iPhone here on the left looks very, very good, very comparable to the Alexa. But there's other shots where the lighting conditions are a little bit trickier, like here where there's some shadow information. The iPhone starts to fall apart. And then in backlight scenarios here, where the iPhone definitely isn't holding up anywhere near as good as the Alexa. So obviously, right, we would hope that you could spend $110,000 on a camera and it would look better than an iPhone. But it is amazing. It's impressive how far they've come. And it's kind of, on the one hand, a little bit scary that the iPhone and really all these phones from Samsung, Google, the cameras are getting so good. And the one of the downsides of using them for really like a lot of different kinds of content creation is just they weren't very practical to use because like how do you monitor, like even if you're filming yourself, like how do you see yourself, and then even if you're not filming yourself, you have a fixed screen. Depending on the angle of the phone, it can be really difficult to see the screen. And then especially on the iPhone, when you just had that lightning connector, it couldn't really output a good signal to a different monitor. But now that they've finally upgraded to USB-C, at least on the Pro models, you can output now to a different monitor to actually be able to use these in a much more functional way. And of course, now they've got the Apple Log profile and the ProRes recording. So I think we're really going to have to see like a lot of improvements from especially like the smaller sensor like cameras. I think they're going to have to continuously or rapidly improve or add some kind of new functionality, new capabilities to keep them above the iPhone, because like this is getting close. It's getting pretty close, and I think for a lot of people, the iPhone or whatever phone it is going to be more than enough. And there's really not going to be a need to go out and pick up a discrete camera, lenses, batteries, all that kind of stuff when these phones are getting so good. So it's kind of good and bad. I mean, for somebody who, like me, who really likes these mirrorless interchangeable lens cameras, I hope that they stay relevant, but I think they're just going to have to really push the boundaries. Let me see. I know we've only got Rambler. Man, thanks for being here, Rambler. You're just keeping it going in the absence of anybody else. Let's see. Is he a LUT specialist? I don't know what a LUT specialist is, but he is a colorist. And in this video, if you watch it, he does mention that he created some LUTs and that I think you can get them if you go to his Discord and maybe if you join his webinar. But he's got here, let's see, I don't know. Yeah, he does make some LUTs, but most of his videos that he does color grading tutorials, he doesn't typically use LUTs. If he does use a LUT, it's typically one that's available in Resolve, like the 2383 Kodak 2383 LUT. So I don't know if that answers your question, if he's a LUT specialist or not, but he's a colorist. Yeah, the Alexa as in the Airy Alexa. So in this video, they're using the Alexa 35, which is the newest Alexa camera, and it's a Super 35 sensor, so it's not the full frame like the Alexa LF or the Mini LF, but it is their latest camera, and it's like, obviously, like all of their cameras, it's a $100,000 camera. Okay, those are all the vid recs I think we had today. And speaking of things to watch, I don't know if anybody is interested or looking forward to Killers of the Flower Moon. That kind of snuck up on me. I didn't realize that was coming out this week, but it's supposed to be out Friday, and it's obviously the newest movie from Martin Scorsese, and it's about 3 hours and 15 minutes long. So I'm not sure if my wife is going to be into it, but I'm definitely going to go see it this weekend. And I don't know if I've ever seen a Scorsese movie. Oh yeah, I've seen in the theaters. I know I saw, what was that one? It was kind of a horror movie, but not exactly. Shutter Island. I saw that in theaters, but I don't know that I've seen a lot or any more of his movies in theaters. So definitely something that I don't want to miss, but I don't know if I'm super thrilled about a 3 hour and 15 minute long movie, but I'm sure it's going to be good. The last feature that he made, I keep forgetting what it's called, but it was one that was developed for Netflix. And I think it had like a minor, like maybe a small theatrical run, but it mostly just premiered on Netflix. I mean, it was essentially the sequel to Goodfellas, but not really, but spiritual successor to his mob movies in the past. It was 3 hours, and I watched the entire thing front to back at home on my TV on Netflix. I know not everyone loved that liked that movie, but I thought it was amazing. So I feel like if I could spend 3 hours at home watching a movie uninterrupted, that I would probably be pretty transported if I were to go see it in the theaters. So let me know, anybody else interested in Killers of the Flower Moon? And another big one that I thought was coming out sooner, but I didn't realize it's not coming out until Christmas Day is Michael Mann's Ferrari. And these are two guys, Scorsese and Michael Mann, who I believe are both in their 80s. So they're pushing it, but they're still getting it done. They're pushing themselves and hopefully making, I don't know, they're making what they want to do, and they're still getting the opportunities to make interesting movies and doing it in different ways. So I know Scorsese has gotten funding from Netflix to make The Irishman, is the one I was trying to think of, and now Killers of the Flower Moon I think was funded mostly by Apple. So they got the budget that way, but I think Michael Mann had to mostly go the independent route on Ferrari and probably pull together financing from different places. And I know he probably got distribution finally from an independent distributor, but it's definitely been an ordeal, kind of an odyssey for him to get this movie off the ground. Surprising, Michael Mann. But neither of these guys really, Scorsese and Mann, have ever been like blockbuster, reliable, like uh, they don't bring in the bank necessarily all the time. Some of their movies hit, some of them don't. And I know the last Michael Mann movie, Black Hat, was kind of a bomb. So I think that might be why he's sort of maybe had some trouble. But anyway, I'm interested. Let me know. Yeah, The Departed is another one. I didn't see that one in theaters. I actually didn't see that one until probably just a few years ago. But yeah, so obviously Leo DiCaprio and Martin Scorsese have worked together many, many times, going back to The Aviator, I think, or maybe it was Gangs of New York, early 2000s, I think was their first collab. So 24 years later, they're still going at it together, making movies. And that's pretty much that. That's everything that I wanted to mention about what to watch. So let's move on to channel stuff. Nothing major to talk about with my channel. I mentioned that I'm working on an FX30 and A6700 comparison video. If you are interested in that, let me know in the comments or in the chat, Rambler, if you if there's anything in particular about these two cameras that you want to know. I mean, Mike B. Salazar pretty much nailed it, so I don't know that I really need to make this video, but I'm trying to come up with some cool locations to go out and get some footage. Thinking about going to the zoo at night. Nashville has this Zoolumination, I think it's called, that runs in the fall, where they open up at night. So that might be a cool way to get some low light footage with these two cameras. And then I'm also working on a kind of a long-term review of the M2 Pro Mac Mini as a video editing computer, in particular with DaVinci Resolve. And let me know if there's anything about that you would like to know about. Because yeah, basically, is it enough? Like, can you edit videos on this base level sort of M2 Pro machine? And what are the limits, essentially? I'm trying to figure out what the limits are, because I haven't really found them with like a lot of the videos that I've made with that computer. I've edited at least half a dozen, if not more, videos during the year with that computer, both in Resolve and in Final Cut Pro. And a lot of times you're just sort of trying to push out videos quickly, so you're not spending, they're not too complex. Maybe they only have a couple of video tracks, some titles, some transitions, a couple of audio tracks, some easy effects, some color grading, nothing crazy. So nothing crazy in terms of like compositing, that kind of stuff. And it's definitely more than up to the task of doing those kinds of videos. So I think for a lot of people the M2 Pro Mac Mini, just the base, so no upgrades on it, is going to be plenty. And then also, obviously, if you're not on the Mac side, there are a lot of like Windows computers that are in that sort of ballpark of $1,300 or maybe even less that can get you that level of performance. But I also was curious to see what the limits are. So it's given me an opportunity to go into some of the features in Resolve that I haven't really dived into, like the relight feature, the depth map, the magic mask in particular. And man, even on my Windows computer, which has the 13900K, the RTX 4080, really fast RAM and hard drives, that relight and depth map are killers. I don't know if the M2 Pro Mac Mini is going to be able to handle it because that computer can barely handle it as it is. But the relight feature is pretty interesting. But I would be curious to know like some workflows that actually make it a little bit more manageable. So I've been trying to figure out those kinds of things. If you want to know more about those, let me know because I would like to dive into them and try to make some tutorials based on those features. Because there's a lot of really cool things that you can do, but I also want to make it practical because in my experience, some of the things that I've been trying to do are really intensive on my computer. So, uh, Rambler is curious about the iPhone 15 Pro Max versus A6700 and optical zoom only. Why optical zoom only? You don't want to know, like just in general, um, or any iPhone 15. Yeah, that was something that I was thinking about. Was like when I was talking about, especially the smaller sensor cameras, APS-C, Micro Four Thirds, 1-inch sensor cameras. They really need to kind of innovate quickly if they don't want to become irrelevant in in the face of the iPhone 15, etc. And it had me wondering, like, I mean, I've got the 12 mini, so my phone's several years old now. I'm not big into phones. Like I've never really been like I take tons of photos with my phones just because I always have it, right? But it's not something that I've ever taken seriously as a way to make content. But with what a lot of the stuff that I'm seeing with the 15 Pro, wondering, man, if it's really close to the level of image quality that you're getting out of something like the A6700 or the FX30, then man, does it make sense just to get rid of these cameras? You already have the phone that you use for all the phone things, and now it can do 90% of what these dedicated cameras can do. I don't know. I'm definitely curious. I haven't really I'm not going out of my way to upgrade to the iPhone 15 anytime soon. But if the opportunity comes along to kind of switch phone plans out or do something like that, and I get a 15 Pro or 15 Pro Max, then I'd be interested in sort of checking it out. I think the full frame and bigger sensor cameras maybe are still going to be safer in the short term, just because of that. I don't know, just the advantages of the large sensor. I mean, even the APS-C is way bigger, right? The size of the sensor is just minuscule in comparison to even APS-C. But just from the comparisons that I'm seeing on Waqas Qazi's channel, a couple weeks ago I showed you guys Patrick Tomaso's videos comparing the iPhone 15 to the FX30. Yeah, certain lenses, the depth of field obviously is you have way more options with these cameras to do things with lenses and optics that you can't do with the iPhone. And even in this comparison that Waqas Qazi is showing on his let me go back to it real quick. Ding. Like this shot here, this is the iPhone, and here we've got the side by side. All right, cool. So iPhone here on the left, Alexa 35 on the right. I think they probably deliberately picked a lens, like a focal length and aperture combo that's going to give them a little bit of a deeper depth of field that matches more closely what the iPhone is giving you with this deep depth of field. But you could easily get a much shallower depth of field on the Alexa 35 with aperture, with a different focal length, etc., that you just couldn't do on the iPhone given its small sensor. So even with APS-C Super 35, there's going to be image quality differences, but I don't know, just in terms of practicality, in terms of like just not spending money on extra cameras that you don't need. I mean, look at this. It's pretty crazy. So, yeah. Whoops. Man, I'll get it down. I'll get it down eventually. I think that's everything that I had planned for today's stream and podcast. I really appreciate anybody who tuned in. I appreciate you, Rambler, for being here and hitting me up in the chat. If you have any last questions, get them in, because I think we are going to go. Thanks again, and maybe I'll see you next week. Why does it ask me to end like 5 times? Yes, just